Welcome back to another episode with an incredible woman, Nadia Florida. Am I saying that right? Your last name?
Fiorita.
Farida?
Fiorita. Yeah,
Oh, okay. It
yeah.
looks like an L. I've always read it like an L. Farita is on the podcast with me today, and she and I are actually in the same business mastermind. We have the same business coach, and so we've run in the same circle for about a year now, but we've never really dove deep into a conversation, just us one on one. I've followed her on Instagram this whole past year. I love her content, resonates very deeply because she speaks to the high achieving anxious woman like a lot of people listening right now. So, Nadia, welcome to the podcast.
Becky, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to have this conversation with you and so excited to, be speaking to your audience about this today.
Me too. So, could you give a little intro, background, what you do, and yeah, just the genius you bring to this world?
Thank you. Yeah, so my name is Nadia Fiorita. I am a licensed psychotherapist. I have a one-on-one private virtual practice. I live in Miami with my husband and three stepchildren. Um, and I specialize in working with women that struggle with high functioning anxiety. So if you're high achieving, if you're ambitious, if you have a drive to be successful, but also struggle with some chronic worry, some overthinking, some perfectionism, then you're my people. And I
Yeah.
know because I'm, you know, I make content for myself and for my audience, right?
I love what you do so much because that has been me. Like, I do have these visions, these dreams. Like, I want to live a life of purpose. It wouldn't feel aligned for me to not go after, what's on my heart. But when I was like on this, journey of detoxing from hustle culture and just trying to learn how to operate out of a place not of a trauma response or fear or, hitting the next goal, I was like, how do I do this? Like, I feel like I had to quit, work altogether to, recreate this relationship with work for me. It had just become like a drug for so long. So I love that you're doing this work in the world of like, hey, you can still have these, amazing world changing goals and at the same time do it with a ton of actual peace. So, before diving in, could we just define the term high functioning anxiety? I think it's a word everyone uses. Anxiety is a very, buzzword, but what is it?
Yeah, so first and foremost, it's not a formal clinical diagnosis. You won't find it in the DSM, which is like the clinical, manual, but it is a term that's used to describe, I think, both men and women, not just women, but, men struggle with it too, who appear on the outside to be successful, have it all together, really confident, um, someone who takes initiative, but on the inside is really, struggling. And there's really kind of this internal battle that goes on. And it could look like I was just kind of referring to symptoms of overthinking or rumination, right? Really kind of being stuck in your head and really kind of intellectualizing. I see a lot of perfectionism. So someone that, sets really, really super high standards. Usually they're really kind of unrealistic. Chronic worry, some people pleasing, which I think a lot of women can really resonate with. But again, there's like this mismatch. I can't talk, but on the outside, they appear a certain way,
Yeah.
right? But then on the inside, they're just battling something that they don't really talk about and that people would never know. Like if you, maybe for you, when you started to kind of really open up about what you were going through, people were like, no way, you
Mhm.
like, you seem to have it all together, girl. Like what are you talking about? um so that's kind of really what the term is is defined as, and it's just becoming, I think, something that more and more people resonate with. It's just really like a common experience, even though it's not a formal diagnosis. And I think the other important thing to say is that you can have high functioning anxiety and not have an anxiety disorder, but you can also have high functioning anxiety and have an anxiety disorder. So it
Interesting.
really just depends on the person.
So what would that difference be? Somebody who has high functioning anxiety but not diagnosed with an anxiety disorder.
So if you like when I think about disorder, I think about how what's the impact on your functioning? Are you is your high functioning anxiety really kind of impacting you at work? Is it impacting you in your relationships? Is it impacting your physical health? Are you isolating more? Are you avoiding situations that cause you anxiety or cause you stress? It's the level of impact on your functioning, if that makes
Makes
sense.
sense. Yeah. It's interesting, even that word disorder. I was reading a book by Peter Levine, and he was just talking about how PTSD, post traumatic stress disorder, everyone I think who's listening to this podcast has probably heard that term. It's just where you're reliving the trauma from the past, even though the past trauma is back in the past. It's as if it's happening right now. But a lot of people have started to drop the D on PTSD because that word disorder can just indicate, it can kind of fuel the shame of like something's wrong with you, when truly it's just a way that you have survived and coped, and that your nervous system has wisely adapted to get through some crazy crap in your life. I'm curious if you've heard anybody doing that, just dropping the D.
I haven't specifically, but I love that. I mean, I don't I think that the DSM, which is again like the clinical manual that we use, is great to kind of help us to conceptualize what someone might be going through, but it's really just, I mean, we're so complex, right? We have all these different aspects of who we are, and so really kind of just focusing on a disorder, I think it does fuel the shame. I think it fuels I mean, shame can fuel other things, right? Shame fuels social isolation, shame fuels not being able to open up about your experience. Um, so I think it fuels the shame, and I think it fuels the stigma. And I think the other thing that happens is people get so they identify so much with that disorder that they then don't believe that there's a different possibility for themselves or for their lives, right? That they just become so attached to that disorder that it really starts to fuel how they see themselves, their beliefs, their actions, their choices, and then they get stuck in this cycle of anxiety and shame.
Yeah. I love what you're saying. I think just words are powerful. So I think it's something worth noticing, whoever we are, whether it's us, somebody listening right now to this conversation, like what labels we're giving ourselves, just noticing, what does that feel like in my body? What does that do? Does it feel shame? Or does it feel expansive and freeing? It's an interesting topic because, yeah, I think we're only as limited as the box we put ourselves in, and words can be really powerful, what we're identifying with. So I love that. And what you said about people being like, girl, you were struggling that whole time, I had no idea. That was totally my experience, especially with social media. Like, I'm not posting my anxiety attacks and my eczema breakouts and my shortness of breath on Instagram. Like, I'm
Or your
posting.
digestive issues, right?
Yeah, exactly. So that's totally spot on. I know before we started recording, I didn't know your family was from Italy, but we were saying how, in different cultures, high functioning anxiety doesn't seem like as the same as in the US. We've got a lot of high achievers and success driven, money driven, it's just the
Image driven. Yeah.
image driven, totally. So, what is it like in Italy? How is it different? Get us outside of our bubble.
So it's such a good question, and I'm so glad that you brought up social media because in thinking about our culture and our society versus like, somewhere like Italy, we're driven by such productivity, by such external achievement, by money, by power, by all of these things. And work, I think in the US is like it's who we are. And for someone that lives in Italy, like I think about my cousins, it's something that they do.
Mm.
It's not necessarily such a big part of who they are. Like when we were in Italy, we were, you know, my two aunts live there, my cousins live there, and my aunt Tina, like during lunch, we had a 2 hour lunch and we were just, enjoying amazing food, laughing, talking. I mean, do people even take a lunch here? I don't think so. I think they just like stuff their face at their desk and, they're still on their computer. So it's, they don't place such a big emphasis on it. And like I think about my cousin Tony, he has a very successful, he's an architect, he's very successful, but he enjoys his life outside of that. It's just like one part of who he is. It's not
Yeah,
everything.
Tony and Tina, they're living the life. I love it. It really does feel like this radical act of rebellion to, in America, slow down and not attach your identity to your work. And I'm still so very much like detoxing from that and detaching from that. And today was interesting for me even before, because this is my first like quote unquote work thing after break. My kids just went back to school. I know your kids are running around somewhere. You're, in a closed room right now, but holiday break is over, and old me would have jumped right back into catching up on everything that I needed to catch up on. And I was feeling the anxiety rising. I was noticing like, oh my gosh, my to-do list just got so long after pretty much taking 10 days completely off and just being with kids. And I booked this morning a sound healing session, a one-on-one sound healing session, which I've done once before, but I was like, this is how I want to ease back into work today. And then was thinking, okay, once that is over though, it's go time. And what came up in that sound healing session was like, Becky, you need to lean more into your feminine and your rest. And I was like, oh my gosh, more? Really? Like it's still like, no, I have work to do. But I freaking drew a bath Nadia after that. And I just sat in the bath for like, I don't know, maybe 20, 30 minutes, poured some Epsom salt, and like my body just really, really needed it. I was like, everything that I need to get to, I'm going to get to. But that really felt radical for me. Like, oh my God, everyone is setting New Year's goals right now and like running to
True.
get things done. And that's what my mind was telling me to do, but my body was saying something different. Um, so that happened today.
That's
But
amazing. I love that.
yeah, I'm curious for you though. Like, I don't know too much about what brought you to this work and just the depths of where your anxiety brought you when it was kind of at its worst. But what is a snapshot of you in your most anxious, or if you would call it a debilitating era?
I would definitely say it was debilitating for sure. So I think what brought me to be so passionate and want to help women like myself and like you is through my own personal experiences. I grew up in a traumatic household. There was a lot of chaos, a lot of dysfunction, and I just through my own introspection and curiosity just started to really kind of wonder like about human behavior, about family systems, about psychology. And I was actually in college getting a business degree for my undergrad, but then found myself really kind of leaning into all these other books outside of my coursework. And then that drew me to wanting to get a graduate degree from Fordham University and just wanting to like help women in the way that I didn't have it at the time that I needed it, right? And like obviously like that was when I was a child and I, have grown up so much since then, but I would say a snapshot was probably right when COVID hit. Like
Hmm.
I was
Talk about it.
going through yeah, right. So much transition. I mean, obviously the world was shutting down and there was like so much stuff around that, but just and my relationship with Damon, my husband now, we were talking about moving to Miami from Connecticut, and I was very, very unhappy in my job at the time. It was a toxic um, environment, and I was working at a private psychiatric hospital at the time. Um, and I was not sleeping. I didn't have any energy. I was like full of just the physical, because we know that we feel our anxiety physically, right? It's stored in our bodies, and so I was just kind of like an anxious wreck. And at the time, actually, I was on Xanax. I think I was taking it as needed, which I hated because I didn't really want to be on medication. Not that I judge people who are on medication, but just for me, um I think at the time I just knew it was kind of like this quick thing that I was just trying to kind of use to get through or find a little bit of relief. Um, I mean, I was kind of irritable and cranky and moody, and you just, you know, on some deep level that that's not the way that you want to be living your life and operating from. Um, so
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, obviously we were in COVID, so we were just kind of like socially isolated anyway, but
Yeah.
that just fueled the other emotions that can come up with anxiety, right?
100.
Frustration, loneliness, sadness, all of those painful emotions that we all try so hard not to feel.
Yeah, that's the thing. We try so hard not to feel it. And then it's like I reached this point where it was learning to lean in and befriend the pain and feel the pain. And the exact thing I'd been avoiding for so long. Like that turns out to be the freaking trick to alchemizing it. But have we talked about this before that you're from Connecticut?
No, I don't think
Okay,
so.
I'm from Connecticut. Where did you live? Yeah.
I was born in Stamford, but lived, wait, what? Where are you from?
Well, no, I was born in Norwich, lived in Lisbon, but that's just so funny.
Oh my gosh, how funny.
Where did you end up moving?
Um, you mean down here in Florida?
No, in Connecticut after you said you were born in Stamford and then
Oh, well, I mean, I lived in Stamford, but
okay.
me and Damon lived in Norwalk for a little while, but it's all in that like Fairfield County, lower
Yeah.
Fairfield County area. Yeah.
So
But
funny.
Norwich is beautiful. That's so funny.
It is.
Where are you now?
I'm in Northern Virginia, close to DC.
Oh, where in Northern Virginia? I have some friends in Virginia.
Bristow?
Oh, okay. Is that near Arlington or no?
It's like 30 minutes away.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay, yeah. I have some friends who, well, my friend Jen, she went to James Madison but stayed down there after.
Oh my gosh. No, Arlington's really fun. It's like the hip area. There's tons of cute places. I love
Okay.
Arlington.
Yeah.
Ah,
So do you ever go back to Connecticut?
yeah, I'm going back on January 29th. I got a flight booked. I try to get up there once a month now because
Okay.
my mom's health is declining. So I'm trying to visit more, but it's not a bad flight. It's like an hour and a half.
Yeah, that's not bad. Good. Okay.
Yeah. So how did you end up starting to transition, like step into some deeper healing? What was it that helped you?
Um, that's a really good question. I mean, I think the first thing was I had to get really honest with myself about where I was at, right? I think I was a therapist, but I was just like going through such struggles of my own, and I had to just, get really kind of honest with what I was feeling, with what I was going through. And I think as women, innately we think that we're doing such good work when we're taking care of everybody else and not ourselves. And I had to start really kind of prioritizing myself. And actually, at that time, I was introduced to um, a woman by the name of Brooke Thomas, who is a faith-based business coach for women. And she introduced me to faith and following Jesus. And that was actually, I didn't know what I was getting into. I was talking to a friend of mine and she's like, you have to follow Brooke. She's amazing. Because I was just like talking about like how I was feeling with her. And I was like, I just feel like I'm kind of like in this weird like transition place. Like so much is happening. And I'm feeling a ton of stress and anxiety and all this stuff. Um, so she was starting this program for women. It was virtual. It was during COVID, and I was like, all right, I'll do it. I didn't even really know like what it was. I just kind of signed up, and then it ended up being this like very spiritual, faith-based group. And I was like, okay, this is this is amazing. So I think leaning more into spirituality and faith was also something else that I hadn't even really tapped into. I grew up Catholic, um, but never really feeling connected to, you know,
Yeah.
religion or church and that whole thing and confession and but this was a whole different way of being in a relationship with God and developing that and learning more about some of just the Bible and what Scripture says and what is meant for us through that. And it just really kind of opened my eyes. And that was probably at that point in my life, um, that was probably one of the first steps. Those were probably the first two steps that I kind of really had to take, if that makes sense.
I love that. I hear you saying the first piece of it, it's easy to dupe yourself into thinking you're okay. One, just having the label of I'm a therapist. It's like I teach people every day like how to navigate life and live functional again and, reclaim vitality and all of that stuff. And I am like crumbling on the inside. That's takes so much humility and courage to do that when you have that label. I felt the same thing being a marriage coach when me and Sebastian are still healing from, years of wounds and still triggered. And so when we still have our valleys, I've had the same just conflict, the inner conflict of like, I'm a marriage coach. I should have this figured out. This should be easy. And it's not any different. I'm still human. And I'm just leading other women with my messy, foot forward and figuring this out still as I go and asking who wants to come along. But I think that's huge that you are able to humble yourself enough to do that. And then the other thing is if you are high functioning, it's like I'm helping so many people or I'm doing all these great things. It's just another way that we can dupe ourselves into thinking everything's okay. Or if we're getting reflection back from other people who are saying you're doing such an amazing job or you're killing it in your career or your family or whatever it is. It's really easy to just be like, oh, okay, I guess I'm fine and not sit with the reality of like, how do I actually feel? Like, what is my body doing right now? How is it trying to express itself? Is it asking to slow down? Is, like you said, there gut issues or, you know, just different ways that my body's calling out and trying to ask me to realign? But the faith piece is awesome. And I just looked her up when you said her name and I was like, oh, Live Out Loud Brooke. I follow her. Yeah, I know who that is. Her
Yeah.
content's amazing. I've never connected with her to my knowledge. Gotta go check, see if I have a DM with her. But
Yeah.
I love that faith was, a huge part of the anxiety healing for you. And it's interesting because in this audience of listeners, there's some who have grown up super duper uber religious, and there's a lot of church trauma and church hurt that they're trying to deconstruct and
Yep.
sift wade through, and others who are kind of blank slates, open books, and they're starting spirituality really for the first time. Maybe they had some influence growing up, but there's not really a lot of like trauma there. And I'm almost envious of those who have the blanker slate because it's like I'm still very much in that deconstruction phase of even things like anxiety. Like there's that Bible verse that says, don't be anxious about anything. And to be honest, for years, that just made me feel like crap. I'm like, dang it, I can't even do this right. Like it was shame fueling because it made it seem like, oh, I guess it's supposed to be that easy. And it's really, really hard. Like I have really, really high anxiety. So curious what you find with the women you work with. When it comes to faith, if you've, noticed similar things.
Um, I mean, I know church trauma and religious trauma can be, a lot of women's experience. Um, and I think that's really hard, especially if for me, like I kind of lean into this Christianity place. Um, but I have to say, I find that, or at least the women that I guess, um, come to me or that I kind of attract, they haven't even really kind of, I'm trying to think actually. Um, there's I guess there's a mix, really. Like
Yeah.
some women don't even kind of go there to the faith and the spirituality piece. I think it seems to I don't want to say scary, but kind of maybe like intimidating in a way.
Mhm.
Um, and then because I do share some of the, faith piece on my stories, I've had some, women who are like, I've come to you because, you have shared that piece of you. And that's something that I've grown up with. And I think a lot of women who maybe follow Jesus or have that strong faith, there's a disconnect between the faith, but then like the mental health part.
Yeah.
They
Mhm.
don't, so it's like they haven't like learned how to integrate the two together, and it's kind of like very separate. So we start having conversations around like, well, how do you bridge that gap? What are ways to support your faith, but that also support the mental health piece as well? And that's like, that's obviously a personal thing that I talk about with the client, because it's going to look very different for everybody.
I love that. Just that you help women integrate the two. And I think that just put words to what I've experienced, at least, where it's at least the church culture that I grew up in. A lot of the, like healing that I've found to be really, really breakthrough for me and helpful was kind of downplayed or demonized as like, oh, breath work or meditation or anything like of the Eastern healing realm was dangerous, or, you're trusting in that over God. And so I stayed away from all of it for years. And when I reached my own breaking point and signed up for that first introduction to somatic healing, it was teaching me things like breath work and trusting my body and things that seemed a little different than what I was used to hearing. And so I was like, is this safe? Was really my first question. And all along the way, it was just deciding like what felt good in my body, what felt good in my conscience and in my own faith, as I did open my mind up to, new healing modalities. But now it's like I am at that point of integrating the two and being really excited about it, because now when I do even read my Bible, it's like seeing it through a whole new lens of like, dude, God's been talking about the breath this whole time. Like scripture talks about it so much. Or, like the your body, God never demonized it in the way that I think it was twisted, just in the cultures that I've, run with, where I think, the body was often associated with sinful desires and pleasures and, fleshly instincts. And so for a long time, I just was completely detached from my body. I saw my body as, something that couldn't be trusted, or my heart was deceitful and it was going to lead me astray. So actually finding like, well, my body is like one of my biggest tools God's given me, and I feel like he speaks to me through my body. It's just this whole new, different, yeah, level of integration now.
Yeah, and I think it could look, like I'm thinking about it, someone in particular, but you can lean on the breath work and help to regulate your parasympathetic nervous system, right? Help trigger that relaxation response, but also lean into prayer, right?
Yeah.
And use prayer as a tool, as well. So I again, like that's I think one of the things that I've seen is like it's just been so separate. And so how do
Yeah.
you, really kind of integrate them?
Yeah, I agree. I don't think it needs to be either or, because even when I do breathwork sessions, I'm like praying while I'm doing it. So I love that. Well, I think the last question I'd love to ask you, Nadia, is what would you say? We did mention shame a little bit. What are the most shame charged behaviors of the high achieving woman? The things that are hard for us to admit to ourselves, to other people? What comes up for you?
Um, I mean, I love that question so much. And I think perfectionism is probably one of the top, things. I think us trying to be perfect in everything that we do is so shame driven. If you know any of, Brene Brown's work, she talks about how it comes from this place of not feeling, good enough. So I think if you struggle with perfectionistic tendencies, that's very shame driven. I think not being able to open up and talk about how you're really feeling is shame driven. I think, um, there's a lot of fears associated with just being truthful about what you're really going through. Um, I think overworking, overcommitting yourself, staying busy. Um, those are also very kind of shame driven, especially if you're trying to like prove your worth through those behaviors. Um, I would say like those are the top probably three that,
Yeah.
and that maybe there was a couple behaviors that you noticed in yourself that you realized were like, oh, this is, this is coming from a place of like not feeling good enough.
Yeah, I mean, everything you just said, I was like, yeah, I can relate to all of that. And it was hard to talk about because I was like, I don't want to be a perfectionist. Ew, like who wants to hang out with a perfectionist? And then the overworking, I think that was my top one is I did feel like I could not detach from work. I was constantly on my phone, constantly trying to get things done and was not able to be present with my kids, or I'd be in the car with Sebastian. It was really a way to soothe everything that was going on in our marriage at the time and everything that I did feel not good enough about with my husband. And so it was my escape. It was like my flight response is I would just throw myself into work and then feel so ashamed for it, so embarrassed to be like caught working even. I remember being in Miami actually. I know you're there right now, but on my best friend's bachelorette weekend, and the last morning we had there was a brunch and I didn't go because I wanted to get work done when I really didn't need to at all. But I was like, I'm just going to hang back in the hotel, and I didn't even say why because I felt ashamed for it. And I was just like at home, just like urgently, anxiously, like taking orders and getting things done. And she ended up saying like how much that hurt her. And she felt like this is my bachelorette weekend. Like this was our last morning together. And I was just so defensive. I was just guarding like what the only thing I knew that was keeping me feeling safe at that time in my life. And we're able to talk about it now. And she even was sleeping over the other night, and it was vacation. I was like, Courtney, I haven't worked all week and I feel amazing. I feel so like okay with it. She's like, who are you? This is like not the Becky I remember. I've never seen you like this. So it's still really new and fresh. But yeah, the overworking one for me was a big one.
Yeah. Yeah, and you just reminded me of another one too. Um I think sometimes we could, another like shame-driven tendency is like that defensiveness or not being, you're like really sensitive to maybe someone pointing something out, whether
Yeah.
it's intended to be criticism or not. You're just like so sensitive to that. And the internal like critical dialogue is huge too. Um, just like, I think people have heard it referred to as the inner critic, right? And it's just like this super harsh, terrible voice that
Yeah.
we have that just puts us down.
Yeah, I love that you brought up Brene. I love her definition of shame. Just another one of those words we all throw around, but just to define it too, I like her definition. She says it's the warm feeling that washes over us, making us feel small, flawed, and never good enough.
So
That's
true.
the warmth.
Yeah.
So this was an amazing conversation, Nadia. So glad we finally got to chat.
Yes, thank you
Um,
so much.
where can people find you and see all your amazing, hilarious, but very profound reels? Tell us all the places.
So my Instagram handle is at holistic anxiety therapist. And it's just my first and last name. You can go to my website. It's just nadiafurita.com. And I do have a free guide. If you find me on Instagram, you can just go to the link in my bio and you can download. I have a 4-step process to helping women reduce high functioning anxiety. So,
We'll link all of that in the show notes. Thank you so much, Nadia, for coming on. And I can't wait to chat again soon and see you in our coaching container.
yes, thank you so much, Becky. I'll talk to you soon.
Bye.